What happens when Hollywood's most unpredictable star faces television's most relentless interviewer? The result: raised voices, tense silences, and one of the most explosive live moments ever caught on morning TV. The Good Morning America studio buzzed as Mark Wahlberg took his seat opposite George Stephanopoulos. What should have been a routine chat about Wahlberg's latest action blockbuster quickly veered off course. The energy shifted the instant the cameras rolled. "Mark, welcome back." George began smoothly, but his tone carried an unmistakable edge. I couldn't help but notice the irony. You're playing a reformed character while your own past continues to spark controversy. Wahlberg's expression barely changed, but the slight tightening of his jaw said everything. "George, I thought we were here to talk about the film, not rehash things from decades ago." "Isn't that the problem?" Stephanopoulos pressed. "You've built a brand around redemption and second chances. Don't the public, and your victims, deserve more than PR-approved statements?" It was clear now. George wasn't pulling punches. Wahlberg leaned forward, his Boston accent thickening. "I've taken responsibility. I've made amends. I've spent 30 years trying to be a better man. What more do you want from me?" "What I want is honesty." George fired back. "Stop hiding behind a polished image. Real accountability means transparency." Wahlberg's face hardened. "Everything I've done, my community work, the programs I support, how I raise my kids. That's real. That's not image." "But you've also fought to keep your juvenile record sealed," George countered. "Is that full responsibility?" The air in the studio felt electric. Wahlberg's publicist shifted nervously off camera. What was supposed to be a friendly morning chat had turned into an emotional interrogation. "You know what, George?" Wahlberg said, voice rising. "I came here in good faith, to talk about a movie that gives people jobs and tells a story worth sharing. But you want to play gotcha journalism over something I did as a kid. Mark, these are documented incidents that affected real lives." George said evenly. "Don't they matter more than your comfort?" "This isn't journalism," Wahlberg snapped. "It's an ambush. You lured me here under false pretenses." "I invited you here for an honest conversation," George replied calmly. "If honesty embarrasses you, that says more about you than it does about my questions." The insult landed. Wahlberg's fists tightened. His voice dropped to a cold whisper. "You want honesty, George? Here's some honesty for you. You're sitting there pretending to be some moral authority," Mark Wahlberg said, his voice low but charged with fury. "But let's not kid ourselves, George. This isn't about justice or accountability. This is about ratings. You're chasing a viral moment, and I just happen to be your target." George Stephanopoulos' smile was razor-thin, almost surgical. "Mark, I'm just doing my job. If you can't handle basic questions about your public record, maybe you shouldn't be doing promotional interviews." The condescension in his tone landed like a slap. Wahlberg's posture stiffened, the calm professionalism evaporating. For a split second, it looked like he might walk off set. "Basic questions?" Wahlberg repeated, his voice edged with that familiar volatility. "There's nothing basic about what you're doing here. You're not looking for truth. You're trying to tear someone down on live TV and calling it journalism." George leaned back, composed and confident. "Your reputation isn't my responsibility, Mark. You built it. I'm just asking you to talk about it, honestly, for once, without the Hollywood spin." "Hollywood spin?" Wahlberg laughed sharply, the sound devoid of humor. "You want to talk about spin? Let's talk about how you twisted this whole thing. You told my team this interview was about my movie, my company, the community work I'm doing. Instead, you've turned it into a hit piece." "I told your people I'd be asking real questions," George replied smoothly. "If you were expecting softball questions about your latest vanity project, you came to the wrong show. This is Good Morning America, not Entertainment Tonight." The phrase vanity project landed like a spark in dry grass. Wahlberg's face flushed. Vanity project? Do you have any idea how many people worked on this film? How many families depend on projects like this? I'm sure they do. George said coolly, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. But that doesn't change the fact that you're using your platform to rehabilitate an image that maybe doesn't deserve rehabilitation. Some actions, he added, his voice steady, have permanent consequences. Some mistakes can't be fixed with charity donations and photo ops. The words hit Wahlberg like a punch. He leaned forward, eyes blazing. His voice dropped to a quiet, dangerous tone. You're right about one thing, George. Some mistakes do have permanent consequences, and you're making one right now. George's eyebrow lifted. Is that a threat, Mark? It's not a threat, Wahlberg said coldly. It's a prediction. You think you're being clever, but what you're really doing is showing everyone exactly who you are. A guy more interested in creating drama than telling the truth. What I care about, George shot back, is accountability. You've made millions off your redemption arc, but you've never truly faced the music. Isn't it time? Wahlberg's patience snapped. Face the music? I've faced more than you could imagine. I've lived with the consequences every single day for 30 years. But I guess that's not enough for you. You want me to crawl on camera and beg for forgiveness, don't you? I don't want anything, George replied evenly. But your victims might appreciate something real. Maybe some remorse instead of this anger. That word, victims, ignited something raw. Wahlberg's entire demeanor shifted. Gone was the Hollywood Polish. In its place stood the street kid from Boston, the one who fought his way through life long before the fame. You want to see remorse? He said, voice trembling with restrained rage. It looks like a kid who made mistakes and spent 3 decades trying to make up for them. It looks like someone who built schools, who funded programs for at-risk youth, who used his success to help others avoid his mistakes. George cut in, smooth as ever. It also looks like someone who sealed his juvenile records. Someone who used his money and influence to hide the full truth. That's not accountability, Mark. That's damage control. The accusation hung heavy in the air, the tension so thick it felt like the studio itself was holding its breath. To be continued. The challenge hung heavy in the air. Wahlberg stared at his interrogator for a long, searing moment, and everyone in the studio could see the war raging behind his eyes. Part of him wanted to explain, to make Stephanopoulos understand, but another part, the tougher, street-hardened part from Dorchester, knew better. This man didn't want understanding. He wanted a spectacle. You know what your problem is, George? Wahlberg said at last, his voice quiet but razor-sharp. Your problem is that you think you're better than everyone else. You sit behind that desk with your perfect hair and your perfect diction and judge people who actually had to fight for everything they got. Stephanopoulos' smile was pure condescension. Mark, this isn't about me. This is about you, and your refusal to take full responsibility for actions that hurt innocent people. If you can't see the difference, that's part of the problem. No, George, Wahlberg replied, leaning forward until they were almost nose to nose. The problem is you've already decided who I am and what I deserve. You don't want accountability. You want a public execution. And you want to be the one holding the axe. The metaphor was brutal, and it only seemed to excite Stephanopoulos. That's quite an image, Mark. Very telling. Do you often think in terms of violence when you're challenged? It was a perfect trap. If Wahlberg denied it, he'd seem defensive. If he admitted it, he'd seem dangerous. It was the kind of manipulative question that made Stephanopoulos so feared and so hated. Wahlberg held his gaze in silence, the air between them thick with tension. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but laced with a cold fury far more unsettling than any shout. You're right, George. I do think in terms of violence when I'm attacked for sport. That's what happens when you grow up the way I did. But here's the difference. I learned to channel that instinct into something productive. You just learned to hide your violence behind a suit and a smile. For a fraction of a second, Stephanopoulos' mask cracked. Then he smoothed it over, his tone turning patronizing again. That's an interesting deflection, Mark, but we're not here to discuss me. We're here to discuss you, and your ongoing pattern of avoiding accountability. Wahlberg's composure finally fractured. Avoiding accountability? Fine, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how you've spent this entire interview trying to humiliate a guest who came here in good faith. Let's talk about how you've twisted every word I've said just to fit your narrative. Mark. Stephanopoulos interrupted, his voice dripping with faux calm. I think you need to settle down. Getting angry won't change the facts of your past. Don't you dare tell me to calm down. Wahlberg snapped, his voice echoing through the silent studio. And don't you dare lecture me about facts when you've spent 20 minutes distorting every single one of them. Stephanopoulos leaned back, smiling smugly. Mark, I haven't distorted anything. I've simply asked you direct questions about documented events. If you find those questions uncomfortable, perhaps you should consider why. You know what makes me uncomfortable, George? Wahlberg said, now standing, his hands braced against the table. It's that someone who calls himself a journalist thinks it's okay to ambush guests with gotcha questions. All for the sake of a viral clip. You're not informing the public. You're entertaining them. Please sit down, Mark, Stephanopoulos said smoothly, relishing his control of the moment. You're making our viewers uncomfortable. Wahlberg let out a bitter laugh. I'm making them uncomfortable. No, George. They're uncomfortable because they can see you for what you really are. A man who destroys reputations for ratings. Stephanopoulos didn't flinch. What I am, he said coolly, is a journalist who asks the questions that need to be asked. If you can't handle scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be in the public eye. That smug arrogance was the final spark. Wahlberg straightened to his full height, and for an instant the entire studio held its breath, certain he was about to explode. But instead he stepped back and shook his head slowly. You know what, George? You win. You got exactly what you came for. You poked and prodded until I lost my temper on national television. Congratulations. I hope it was worth it. Mark, nobody forced you to react this way. Stephanopoulos replied, his tone dripping with false sympathy. Your reaction says more about your character than my questions ever could. Legitimate questions? Wahlberg's voice cracked with disbelief. George, nothing about this interview has been legitimate. To be continued. Wahlberg's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You've been playing games from the moment I sat down. George! And we both know it. Stephanopoulos turned slightly toward the camera, as if ready to deliver his closing line to the audience. But Wahlberg wasn't done. Don't you dare turn to that camera! He snapped. Don't you dare try to play the victim now. You orchestrated this entire setup. And the moment it doesn't go your way, you want to act like I'm the one out of control. Mark, I think it's time for you to leave. Stephanopoulos said quietly. Just loud enough for the microphones to catch it. Oh, I'm leaving, Wahlberg replied, unclipping his mic, his hands trembling slightly with adrenaline. But not because you're kicking me off. I'm leaving because I still have enough self-respect not to sit here while you pretend this farce is journalism. He tugged the mic cord free and looked up again. You want to talk about accountability, George? Real accountability looks like admitting when you've made a mistake. It looks like owning your failures, not deflecting them onto your guests. Mark, please, Stephanopoulos started, his voice faltering for the first time. The control he'd wielded so effortlessly moments before had vanished. Please what? Wahlberg shot back. Please sit here quietly while you try to humiliate me? Please play along with your ambush and call it journalism? I don't think so. He stepped away from the chair, then turned back one last time. You know what the real tragedy is, George? You had a chance. a real chance, to have an honest conversation about redemption, about growth, about how people can change. But you turned it into a circus. Stephanopoulos opened his mouth to respond, but Wahlberg cut him off with a sharp wave. Save it. I'm done talking to you. But I'll tell you this. When people watch this interview, they're not going to see a journalist holding a celebrity accountable. They're going to see exactly who you are, and they'll decide for themselves who deserves their respect. With that, Wahlberg walked off the Good Morning America set, leaving George Stephanopoulos sitting alone behind his desk. The ambush undone, the silence deafening. Cameras kept rolling, capturing every awkward second as the crew stood frozen. The clash between Hollywood's most unpredictable star and television's most ruthless interviewer had reached its explosive end, and the world was left to decide who had crossed the line and who had simply refused to be pushed any further. What do you think? Was Stephanopoulos justified in his relentless questioning? Or did he go too far chasing a viral moment? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible celebrity confrontations that reveal what really happens when the cameras don't blink.